Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty massive today. Evolution.
Oh, yeah. Evolution is huge.
Specifically, how new species arise, like where do they come from?
How do we get, like, all these different life forms, right?
Exactly. We've got excerpts from a biology textbook to guide us,
Always helpful.
and it's a really cool, an article about the Farallon Islands off the California coast.
Oh, wow. Haven't read much about those.
Apparently, they call them California's Galapagos.
Oh, that makes sense. Isolated islands, lots of unique species.
Yeah, it's got me really curious. So think of this deep dive as a crash course on evolution. What it is, how it works, and why it matters to, well, everyone.
Because at the end of the day, it's the story of how we all got here, right?
Exactly. And we'll touch on some pretty mind-blowing stuff, from Darwin's adventures to how the Grand Canyon is like a giant history book of life.
Speaking of Darwin, it's amazing how much his work changed our view of the natural world. Before him, most people believed that species were just fixed, unchanging.
Like they were created exactly as they are now, and that was it.
Right, but Darwin came along with this radical idea. Species actually transform over time.
It's almost hard to believe now, knowing what we know, that people didn't always think that way. So how did he even come up with this revolutionary idea? Our textbook mentions this 5-year voyage he took on the HMS Beagle.
Ah, the famous Beagle voyage.
And he saw so much. Lush rainforests, a literal earthquake that thrust the ocean floor upward. He even found seashells fossilized in mountains.
Talk about evidence for a changing Earth.
It really makes you think, I mean, how could you not start questioning everything after seeing that?
Exactly. What's key here is that Darwin was experiencing firsthand the dynamism of Earth, how it's constantly changing. This was a huge shift from the idea of a young, static Earth, and it laid the groundwork for his theory.
Okay, let's unpack this voyage a bit more. The textbook highlights his time in the Galapagos Islands.
Ah, yes, the Galapagos.
Each island had its own unique environment, which seems to have really fascinated Darwin. He noticed all these variations in species from island to island, like the giant tortoises. They had different shell shapes depending on which island they lived on.
It's almost as if each island was running its own evolutionary experiment, isn't it?
It really is. So he was already starting to connect the dots between the environment and the traits of species. And then he took inspiration from something pretty familiar, artificial selection. Think about dog breeds. We have everything from tiny Chihuahuas to massive Great Danes, but they all descended from wolves.
Humans have been manipulating the traits of organisms for centuries through selective breeding.
It's true. And Darwin saw a parallel in nature, a natural process he called natural selection, where the environment, not human choice, does the selecting.
It's the environment that decides which traits are favorable, which ones help an organism survive and reproduce.
Okay, so how does this natural selection work? Break it down for us.
Well, it starts with the simple fact that individuals vary, even within the same species. Some are faster, some are stronger, some are better camouflaged. And these variations, even small ones, can make a big difference in survival.
So it's like nature is constantly running this giant experiment, testing out different combinations of traits.
Exactly. And those individuals with traits that make them better suited to their environment, they're more likely to survive, more likely to reproduce. And that means they're more likely to pass on those advantageous traits to their offspring. So over many generations, those beneficial traits become more common in the population.
I'm starting to see how this could lead to big changes over time. But do we have a specific example of this in action? Something concrete?
Darwin himself used the giraffe as a classic example. Imagine a population of giraffes, all with varying neck length. Now, picture a drought hitting their habitat. Food becomes scarce, the only leaves left are high up in the trees. Those giraffes with slightly longer necks, they have a clear advantage.
They can reach the food that others can't.
Right, they'll be able to survive the drought, reproduce, and pass on those long neck genes to the next generation.
So over time, longer necks become the norm. The giraffe population shifts toward that trait.
Precisely. It's this constant interplay between variation and environmental pressures that drives the process of evolution. And we see this playing out not just in giraffes, but across the entire spectrum of life.
Which brings us back to those Farallon Islands we mentioned earlier, California's Galapagos. They're a perfect example of how diverse environments can lead to the evolution of unique species.
Islands are like natural laboratories for studying evolution. They're often isolated, with unique environments that can drive the evolution of new traits.
So are those islands like a real-time laboratory? Is there research happening there?
Absolutely. Researchers like Peter and Rosemary Grant have spent decades studying Darwin's finches on the Galapagos, and their work provides compelling evidence for what we call microevolution.
Okay, microevolution. So that's evolution on a smaller scale.
Exactly. Changes happening within a species over shorter timescales.
Got it. So what exactly did the Grants find with these finches? What were they looking at?
Well, one of their most famous studies looked at how a drought impacted finch beak size. During the drought, food became scarce. The finches with larger, stronger beaks were better able to crack open the tough seeds that remained.
So the drought was like a filter, favoring the birds with the bigger beaks.
Exactly. The birds with smaller beaks struggled. And what did the Grants find? They documented an increase in average beak size in just a few generations.
Wow, so they actually saw evolution happening in real time.
It was a real-time example of natural selection at work, showing that evolution isn't just something that happened in the distant past. It's a continuous process that can unfold right before our eyes.
Kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. So we've got these small-scale changes happening within species. But how does that lead to the bigger picture, the formation of entirely new species? What about those huge evolutionary transformations that have taken place over millions of years?
That's where macroevolution comes in.
Right. Macroevolution.
Large-scale changes over vast stretches of time, leading to the incredible diversity of life we see today. And to understand how that happens, we need to explore the fascinating process of speciation, which is simply how new species arise.
All right, speciation. It sounds like we're about to get into some really interesting territory. So how does this branching out of the tree of life happen? How do we go from one species to two, or even hundreds? Right, so speciation. It sounds like we're about to get into some really interesting territory. So how does this branching out of the tree of life happen? How do we go from one species to two, or even hundreds?
Well, there are a few different pathways to speciation, and it often starts with isolation.
Isolation, like being separated from the rest of your species.
Exactly. Imagine a population of organisms getting divided by some geographical barrier, like a mountain range or a river. That's what we call allopatric speciation.
Allopatric speciation. So they're in different places. Allo, like different.
Allo means different. Patric refers to homeland, so different homelands.
Makes sense. So over time, these separated groups start evolving independently, each adapting to their own unique environment.
Precisely. And as they adapt, their genetic makeup starts to diverge.
They're becoming more and more different genetically.
Exactly. Eventually, the differences become so significant that even if the two groups were to come back into contact, they could no longer interbreed.
They become so different they're not even compatible anymore.
That's right. They've become distinct species.
Wow. Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. Do we have any real-world examples of this allopatric speciation, something that makes it a little easier to grasp?
Well, there's a great example right here in the United States. Have you ever heard of the kaibab squirrel?
I don't think so. Tell me more.
They live on the north rim of the Grand Canyon.
Okay.
Their close relative, the Abert squirrel, lives on the south rim. Now, the Grand Canyon itself has acted as this barrier for thousands of years, separating these two populations of squirrel.
What happened?
They've evolved distinct characteristics. The kaibab squirrel even has this striking white tail, completely different from the Abert squirrel.
Wow. So the Grand Canyon basically carved out a new species of squirrel.
Oh.
That's amazing. But you mentioned that there are other ways new species can form. It doesn't always require a giant canyon, right?
Right. Speciation can also occur without physical separation.
Oh, really?
How does that work? It's called sympatric speciation.
Tempatric.
Yep.
Okay, so same homeland.
Yes. And it's often driven by changes in behavior or ecology within a single population.
Okay, I'm really curious about this. Do we have an example of that too?
Absolutely. Think about those hawthorn flies.
Oh, thorn flies.
They originally laid their eggs on hawthorn fruit.
Okay.
But when apple trees were introduced to North America, some flies started laying their eggs on apples instead.
Ah, so two different groups of flies specializing on different fruits within the same area.
Exactly. Over time, these groups started to diverge.
How so? What kind of divergence?
They developed different breeding seasons, meaning they were no longer interbreeding. So they're not mixing their genes anymore.
Right. And now, well, they're well on their way to becoming distinct species.
That's incredible. So even within the same geographical area, subtle changes in behavior can lead to the formation of new species.
It's a reminder that evolution is dynamic, constantly shaping and reshaping the tapestry of life.
This is all so fascinating, but we've been talking a lot about how species diverge and become distinct.
Right.
What about the interconnectedness of life? Don't species also evolve together in response to each other?
You're talking about coevolution.
Coevolution,
It's
yeah.
one of the most captivating aspects of evolution. Coevolution is like an intricate dance between two or more species where they evolve in response to each other's adaptations.
Okay, I need a visual here. What's a classic example of coevolution? Something we can really picture.
One of the most iconic examples is the relationship between hummingbirds and the flowers they pollinate.
Hummingbirds, those tiny, energetic birds.
Hummingbirds have evolved these long, slender beaks, perfectly suited to reach the nectar deep inside tubular flowers, so they can get to the food that other birds can't.
Right, and guess what? The flowers have evolved shapes and colors that specifically attract hummingbirds.
It's like they're calling out to them, hey, come over here, we have what you need.
Exactly. Coevolution highlights this interconnectedness of life and the amazing ways in which species can shape each other's evolutionary trajectories.
So the hummingbirds need the flowers for food, and the flowers need the hummingbirds for pollination. They've become totally dependent on each other.
It's a beautiful example of mutualism. Both species benefit from the relationship.
This is making me think about the pace of evolution.
Okay, the pace.
Is it always slow and steady like a gradual incline? Or can it be more like a roller coaster with sudden bursts of change?
You've hit on a key debate in evolutionary biology. Gradualism versus punctuated equilibrium.
Gradualism, punctuated equilibrium, those are big words.
Darwin initially proposed that evolution occurs gradually over long periods. But the fossil record often tells a different story. We see periods of relative stability punctuated by rapid bursts of evolutionary change.
So it's not necessarily an either situation. Both gradualism and punctuated equilibrium can play a role in shaping the diversity of life.
Exactly. Evolution is complex, influenced by a multitude of factors.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've covered biogeography, adaptive radiation, we've even touched on coevolution. Are there any other compelling examples of evolution at work that we should touch on?
Well, we can't forget about coevolution, which we mentioned briefly earlier. Remember those hummingbirds and their perfectly matched flowers?
Yes. It's such a beautiful example of how species can evolve together in these intricate relationships.
It's a reminder that evolution isn't just about competition.
It's not.
It's also about collaboration and these fascinating ways in which species can become interdependent.
Okay, I get that. Do we have any other examples of coevolution? I'm finding this concept so intriguing.
Absolutely. Think about predator-prey relationships.
The classic chase.
As predators evolve to become more efficient hunters, their prey often evolve defenses to avoid being caught.
Like gazelles evolving to run faster to escape from cheetahs.
Exactly. It's an evolutionary arms race, with each species constantly pushing the other to adapt and evolve.
Wow, so evolution is this constant dance between species shaping and being shaped by their interactions with each other.
It's a beautiful and complex interplay, constantly unfolding.
It really is. And it's a reminder that the story of evolution is still being written. New discoveries are being made all the time, revealing even more about the intricate processes that have shaped the diversity of life on Earth. Well, I, for one, am hooked on this evolutionary saga. We've covered so much ground already, from Darwin's voyage to DNA analysis, biogeography, adaptive radiation, and the dance of coevolution.
We have covered a lot.
But before we wrap up our deep dive, there's one more big question we need to address.
Oh, and what's that?
Well, we've been talking a lot about the past,
Mm-hmm.
how evolution has shaped the life we see today. But what about the future? What might evolution hold for us, for all the other species on this planet? Especially considering the impact we humans are having on the environment.
That's a question that scientists are grappling with right now, and it's a question that has profound implications for the future of life on Earth.
All right, everyone, buckle up. We're about to venture into the uncharted territory of evolution's future. Stay with us as we explore the possibilities, the challenges, and the potential paths that life might take. We're back and ready to tackle the big question. What does the future hold for evolution? I have to admit, thinking about the future of life on this planet, well, it's both exciting and a little daunting.
It's true, it really does make you think. There's a sense of wonder, but also some concern, right?
Exactly.
On the one hand, evolution has this incredible capacity to generate diversity and resilience. It's how life adapts to even the most challenging circumstances.
So there's hope then. Hope that species can evolve and adapt to the changes we're seeing in the environment.
Well, there's definitely potential for adaptation. We see examples of it happening already.
Oh yeah, like what?
For instance, some plant species, they're evolving to tolerate higher temperatures and drought conditions.
So they're basically becoming tougher.
Right. And some animals are shifting their ranges, moving to find more suitable habitats.
That's encouraging to hear. But I imagine there are limits. Right. Limits to how quickly species can adapt.
You're right. Adaptation isn't a magical solution. The pace of environmental change is a critical factor. If changes happen too rapidly, species may not have enough time to evolve the necessary adaptations.
So the rate of climate change, for example, could actually outpace the rate of evolution for some species.
It's a real concern, and it's why understanding the interplay between environmental change and evolutionary processes is so crucial.
It makes you wonder, what kind of adaptations might we see in the future? I mean, can we even predict how life might evolve in response to the challenges ahead?
It's tough to predict with certainty, but we can look for clues in the patterns of the past. Evolution often follows predictable pathways, favoring traits that enhance survival and reproduction in a given environment.
So if we know the environmental pressures, we might be able to make educated guesses about what kinds of adaptations might arise.
Exactly. For example, in a warming world, we might expect to see species evolving to tolerate higher temperatures,
Makes sense?
or maybe developing more efficient ways to conserve water.
It's fascinating to think about the potential evolutionary trajectories that might unfold. What about us humans? Are we still evolving? And if so, what might the future hold for our species?
Well, as we discussed earlier, humans are still subject to the forces of natural selection. But our evolutionary path is increasingly influenced by our own actions and choices.
So things like technology, medicine, even cultural shifts, they're all playing a role in shaping our evolution.
Absolutely. For instance, advancements in medicine, they've allowed us to overcome many diseases that would have been fatal in the past.
It's true, we've made incredible progress.
And this has altered the selection pressures acting on our species.
It makes you wonder how our reliance on technology might be shaping our evolution. Are we becoming more dependent on our devices, less physically active? Could that have evolutionary consequences down the line?
Those are fascinating questions. Researchers are exploring them right now.
I bet.
It's certainly conceivable that our technology-driven lifestyles could lead to evolutionary changes.
Yeah.
But it's still too early to say for sure what those changes might be.
This whole conversation is making me realize that evolution isn't just some abstract concept from the past. It's happening right now, all around us, and we're part of it, shaping it and being shaped by it.
It's an ongoing process, constantly unfolding.
It really is. And it underscores the importance of understanding evolution, not just for scientific curiosity, but for making informed decisions about our future and the future of life on Earth.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of life and understanding the consequences of our actions.
Well, on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. We've journeyed from Darwin's revolutionary ideas to the intricate mechanisms of speciation, explored the dance of coevolution, uncovered the evidence for evolution's grand narrative, and even contemplated the future of life on this ever-changing planet.
It's been quite a journey, full of fascinating twists and turns.
It really has. And I hope you've come away with a deeper appreciation for the power and wonder of evolution.
Absolutely. It's a story that never gets old.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely going to be looking at the world around me with a new perspective, noticing the subtle signs of evolution at work. From the variations in bird speaks to the adaptations of plants in my own backyard.
That's the beauty of understanding evolution. It opens up a whole new way of seeing the world, recognizing the interconnectedness of life and the incredible journey that has brought us to this point in time.
Well said. So as you go about your day, remember that you are part of this incredible story of life on Earth.
We all are.
A story that's still being written. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep marveling at the wonders of evolution. Until next time, fellow deep divers.